Hello and welcome to another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action, a series where leaders look back at decisions they've made and consider a series of questions. I'm Peter Stiepelman, I'm your host, and I'm an imperfect leader. I spent more than 20 years teaching and leading, first in the Oakland Public Schools in Oakland, California, and then in the Midwest, Missouri to be exact, where I was a teacher and principal and assistant superintendent and then the superintendent of the fourth largest district in the state. I'm constantly striving to learn from my experiences and from the experiences of other leaders. The aim of this podcast is to lift the learning and lift the imperfect leaders up. That way, when you hear the term imperfect, you'll see strength. Strength from the candor needed to recognize imperfection as a real advantage. Let's get started. Today on An Imperfect Leader, we've invited Dr. Eric Knost to join us. Dr. Knost is serving as the superintendent of MERS, Missouri Goodwill Excel Center. Eric has 34 years experience in the education field, 17 years of experience as superintendent and deputy superintendent in 3 different school districts. And he was the superintendent in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Before that, he was the superintendent of the 3rd largest district in Missouri. Eric Knost, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you, Peter. Glad to be here. Honored to be here.
So, Eric, we've known each other for a long time. As members of the Missouri delegation to a Midwest Council of Superintendents, I was just always so impressed by you. As an outsider looking in, I was so impressed by your ability to communicate the 2 things that matter more than anything in a school district: children and teachers. Who influenced you on that approach?
That's first of all, it feels great to hear you say that, because I'm very proud of the fact that I'm more along the lines of that relationship leader than I am the academic scholar, and I'm humble enough to admit that. It's I think those have been the reasons for whatever success I've had. But that goes all the way back to my earliest experiences with school and my kindergarten years. I was the youngest in my family. We had some struggles in our family that I may touch on later, but I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want anything to do with going to school, and of course I had to, and got on that bus the first day of kindergarten, tears running down my face, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. Kindergarten wasn't a pleasant experience, but truth be told, the bus driver, a guy by the name of Mr. Roberts, was my little angel, maybe you'd call him that. But I made it through kindergarten because Mr. Roberts, I sat on the bus till everybody got off, and he grabbed me by the hand and walked me to class every single day. And I can tell that story in a different way, and I always end up in tears because it's very real to me. And that's the first lesson I learned in school, was that power of connecting with on my end a child, and on his end an adult. So kids matter, teachers matter, adults matter. Without it, we've got nothing, and with it, we've got the chance to have everything.
So as I was preparing for our conversation, I was reminded of some of the innovative things that you led as a superintendent. For one, I remember that we wanted to, in our school district, create a program where kids would learn geometry on one day and then do a house construction on the other. And you said, yeah, you guys got that from us. And it was true. We got it from you, where kids were learning how to build a tiny house on one day and then learning about the application of that construction work from their geometry class. It was amazing. And I can remember asking a kid in January who was outside working on a house, "You're outside, it's cold." And they said, "Yeah, but we're working on this house so that somebody doesn't have to be cold." Oh my God, they're learning math, they're learning construction, and just that human connectedness, that empathy for others. And then I talked to you about creating an early college program where with a local community college, where our kids would get both of their high school diplomas and their associate's degree, because I thought that would be a game changer. And you're like, yeah, we've been doing that for years. So, you have always been right at the, beyond all of us in terms of innovations. And I really thought in terms of early college that partnership was an innovative way to think differently about getting ready for life. And then now you're working to help individuals find a different pathway to success. I wonder if you'd tell us just a little bit about your current work, why it's so important. Tell us about MERS, Missouri Goodwill Excel Center.
Well, it is important work. And MERS Goodwill, who, of course, has a mission to change lives through the power of work. People think of Goodwill and they think of the retail stores, which is a big part of Goodwill, but that's a funding mechanism for all of the work rehab they do, the connections they put people in place for finding jobs, helping people with special needs. It's an amazing organization. They had experience where a lot of people would come to them and say, I want help, getting down a certain path in employment. Well, what do you want to do? And maybe they'd want to be in healthcare or something, and they'd need a high school diploma for that. And they'd say, well, you know what? I had some barriers in my life, but they didn't complete high school. So what MERS Goodwill used to do is they'd get them set up with a GED program. They'd try to get them through that. And the problem is not all the pathways were served well by someone getting a GED. So 4 years ago, this is in the 5th year, they emulated the Excel centers from a few other states, Indiana in particular. And they are adult high schools in the state of Missouri. They're really public schools because they're free and open to anyone. We don't take any money from public schools, and we don't take students from public schools, which is 21 and older. So once they hit majority age, right now anyway, that's when they're eligible. We have 4 centers in Missouri. In January, we'll open 2 more. 6 million people in Missouri. I don't know. I hope that's the right number, somewhere around there. 500,000 adults do not have a high school diploma. So it fits with the MERS Goodwill mission, because the goal is graduation. That's not one of our measurements, though. Our measurement is tracking after graduation and what we help you do with that diploma. So every student gets a life coach. We connect with, whether it's industry recognized credentials that we hook them up with, whether it's pre-apprenticeships, apprenticeships, or dual credit with college courses, because they want to go to college. And we've had students that have done all of the above, and it's really powerful to see it work. We have built-in daycares, drop-in built-in daycares in every center. So we're trying to take away all the barriers. We have ways to help with transportation.
The work that you're doing is life-changing, and I'm so glad you mentioned the difference between just a traditional GED program, sometimes referred to as high set, and
Right.
what MERS Missouri Excel Centers are doing, because the Goodwill Excel Centers are doing, because you're providing childcare, you're providing food, if I remember correctly, you're
Yes, we
providing
are.
transportation options, you're providing life coaches. And if you're a systems thinker and you apply stock flow maps and you're trying to increase employment, not increase high school graduates. However, the way you get to increase lifelong employment is some of these pieces that flow into that stock. So high school diploma, eliminating other barriers so that basic needs are met, so that you can get where you need to go. It's really just an incredible piece.
But you think about, from an economical standpoint too, the more people we put in the workforce, the more people that are doing meaningful work, they contribute in so many ways. Not only the work they're doing, but their taxes contribute, and investing in them. There's nothing that anyone can say that would make any sense in not supporting programs like these.
I'm so glad that you're doing it. In leadership, and I don't think it matters what industry you're in, we all find ourselves battling this notion that we're supposed to be perfect or pretty darn close. And the margin of error for making mistakes can often be razor thin, particularly for some leaders in particular. And I'm comfortable saying that I'm imperfect, and I've come to embrace that. And I'm interested in your thoughts about that term. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I think the best way to describe that from my mind is it resonates as honesty, and something that every leader has to embrace. And the earlier you can embrace it, the better leader you're going to be. Because I'd like to say that imperfection defines perfection in a leadership role. And that's simply what I mean. Embracing your imperfections and embracing your humanistic qualities, it makes you real. It makes you a better person. And again, it's honesty. And the best of leaders are those that put honesty at the forefront. And that's not just about what you say. When we embrace our imperfections as leaders, when we accept that we're human, we're not superheroes. We're just not. Maybe the work we do is something in that category, but as human beings, our embracing our imperfections allows us to empathize. I think when you embrace your imperfection, it allows you to look at all of those struggles that your students may have or have had and recognize part of yourself within those struggles. But if we try to have ourselves viewed as perfect, it's going to minimize our reach. It's going to minimize our impact because it's not real. And when you're not real, your effect is diminished significantly. So it's powerful to me, but I think Imperfect Leader speaks to honesty.
I love it. I like to think that imperfect leaders are also intentional about noticing how patterns or elements have changed, how they change over time, and how those changes impact the system. This very habit is described by the Water Center for Systems Thinking as sees change over time as dynamics of a system. And I thought about this habit when I saw you were now working with individuals whose previous experiences in school may be described as unsuccessful. And I love this question they pose to leaders. What elements have changed over time? Simple, right? But what have you noticed about school systems and their ability to meet the needs of individuals, especially those who have not thrived in traditional systems?
You know, I told you a story a while ago about my bus driver in kindergarten. I think we have always had that important human touch, which transcends everything. It transcends every barrier. It transcends every hurdle we have. I mean, we find ourselves, we're obviously as schools, we need funding. And so legislators get involved in schools and people get involved in critiquing schools. And there becomes this monotonous mound of unnecessary stuff that gets in the way. But I think a bit of that evolution has been that, you know, what I talked about, Mr. Roberts, you know, that was 1970. And I think the fact that I can sit here with you on a podcast and talk about these things and know that I think people more often than not embrace the things that we're talking about. And I don't know that that's always been the case. I mean, the you know, rigor, and the academic piece is important and relevant, all of that. But, you know, there are kids who graduate high school who have done phenomenal things academically, but there may have been social emotional issues that weren't addressed because we never used to address those things in schools. And sadly, as smart as they may be, they're usually not those that go off and conquer the world. Flip that around. I can tell you countless stories of high school graduates who did okay academically. You know, they made it, but man, they fell in love with life because of the human connection, because of the relationship, and they're the ones that knock it through the roof.
Well, you're really speaking to a departure from a factory model where we say students, because that is a great way to have a unit of, you know, sort of material. And so far I've heard you really talk about children. And when I spoke earlier about the innovative practices that you brought to your district that we copied, it was because you were really speaking to the individual and not the masses as a number, but rather how do I meet the needs of individuals? Which is why I think
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that you're now working with 21 and up who are individuals looking for a better chance at success in terms of life achievement. And it's just, I think it's pretty marvelous.
Yeah, fabulous. And I'm gonna pitch this to you because I think it's so relevant. Um, we judge the work that our schools do. We're forced to judge them because of required accountability through, the proverbial test scores and all those kinds of things. And then we're constantly told all these industrialized nations are doing better. And then you stop and you think, wait a minute, something doesn't connect here, because our country is the foremost economic power that exists on this planet. We are number one in intellectual property. You can't, we rank high in entrepreneurship. We are, near the top as far as a skilled labor force. You can't get that without effective schools. Yet if you look at test scores, oh my goodness. So to your point, that evolution of sorts, I think that's because educators continue to grow and learn that whether it's the social emotional piece, but that relationship building, that real human heart connection matters, and it makes a difference.
An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action is supported by ILAA, a firm dedicated to supporting aspiring new and established leaders. For more information, please find them at human-centeredleaders.com. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest is Dr. Eric Knost, Superintendent of the MERS Missouri Goodwill Excel Center. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we discuss it. So, Eric, what happened?
So, in reflecting on this question, mine is kind of a culminating answer, and there was, there was kind of this moment in my career where it really kicked in, where I was like firing on 8 cylinders because I understood this, and I'll get to that what happened point, but I think I was longing for it all along. I think some of it's relative to the many things we've already discussed in this podcast. But I found myself as an administrator sometimes having to make tough decisions because policy said I had to make certain decisions, and I didn't. If I were, when I was young and still kind of trying to figure out my sea legs, as they say, you don't always have the power or the gumption to react in ways that go against the grain. You learn that over time, but there were decisions that I would be forced to make, policy decisions, maybe relative to, does a student's attendance cause them to pass or fail if they had extensive absenteeism, and I would make policy decisions and then go home and reflect and be literally upset. Literally like gut-wrenching upset, to where the loved ones would know something's going on. He's in his head and something's going on there. So I think the fact that I was conscientious about that and wrestled with that over the years served me well, because every time I would have one of those gut-wrenching moments where I'd really challenge a decision because it was, related to policy or related to finances, it would make me want to reflect more, it would make me want to revisit it. But really going forward, I always wrestled with those things, but there was a time, and I think I got better every time, and allowed me to be more of a human leader. I'm like anybody else. I have a very vulnerable side to me. I'm very comfortable telling you and anybody that cares to listen to what I have to say through this podcast, I don't have thick skin. Peter, if you want to hurt my feelings, I promise you, you could say something with intent and it would work. I wouldn't, I don't have the ability, and I don't care to act like I have the ability anymore to ignore that. And why is all that important? Well, that all came to I think a real realization for me in my years in Rockwood. I dealt with two 500-year floods, about I think 16 or 18 months apart. Now you have to think about that, because that obviously doesn't make sense. But that's literally two floods classified as 500-year floods, literally a year and a half apart. The first one was the scariest thing I've ever been involved in. I can get, if I think about it in certain ways, I can get choked up now. But Peter, I didn't know what I was doing. I was having to make decisions, and I was trying to help a community, and I wanted to be this guy that looked like he knew what he was doing, because I was trying to hold just, and by the way, it had impacts on my whole district. It was very large, but severe impacts on one portion of the community, the Eureka area in Eureka High School and the Eureka School community inside of Rockwood. I mean, we had schools surrounded by water, and I thought, well, what do you do? Well, I think I need to try to go to the school. Why? I don't know. I had to go to the school. The Coast Guard took me to school in a boat, and I pulled my phone out and I did this selfie, and I'm smiling, and I said something like, oh, this is the most surreal boat ride I've ever had. It ended up on national news because I put it on social media, but I was dying inside, because I was trying to project as this leader that had it all together. I knew what I was doing. And when I came back from visiting the school, I got off that little boat, and the media was standing there, and it's still floating out there somewhere, but I kind of broke down a little bit. And I walked away from that with this relief, because I showed some vulnerability. And as I reflected, I looked before I was willing to show that vulnerability. The rest of my very large district wasn't understanding the problem. This was actually happening right around New Year's Day. It was kind of bizarre timing for a major flood, but we were contemplating if we weren't going to have school. And there were people saying, what do you mean you're going to call off school? There was this very, some people really hurting, and other people with no level of compassion. And I once I exposed some vulnerability, and the fact that I was very human in my approach, the whole tone changed. And I started realizing that all through my career, those little examples that I gave earlier, I was trying to learn that we are imperfect, we are human, and the best leaders are the ones that can embrace that and do embrace that, and allow people to see their vulnerabilities. And since then, I had things bottled up in me. I had trauma in my life. When I was the youngest of four children, and grew up. My oldest brother had very significant special needs. He grew up in a time where he was just labeled as mentally retarded, and confined to a wheelchair his whole life. And I came home from school every day being very aware of what my parents were dealing with. And then when he was 17 years old, he passed away. And that affected me. It happened in our house. It was, and I'm be 58 years old in January, and it still hits me hard. And I've never talked about that. And when I realized it was okay to be a human, and when something's difficult, to say, look, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm doing the best that I can, and that's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you my best. I mean it from the heart. I'm going to love with every fiber of my being, and I'm going to try to get us through this. But I'm going to screw up. I'm not perfect. And it just, at that moment in my career, that flood time, it just,
To watch your parents care for their child, your
Mhm.
brother, I do think that those are the experiences that are profound, and they help socialize us to a point where when we are in a position to lead others, that we can lead with empathy and compassion. And
Yeah.
then, I'm you painted this scenario so beautifully. I see you on this boat approaching this school and thinking, what on earth do I do? And I wonder, so many times we're told as teachers when we first start out, don't smile till Christmas, right? And
Mm.
what a mistake that is for our kids
Yeah.
not to recognize that we're human and so are they, and we're going to learn this together and be together. And I think the most successful leaders, although if they don't take care of themselves, there is a propensity for burnout because you're going to wear your emotions quite publicly because that's exactly what everybody needs, but it
Yeah.
is also incredibly difficult. I'm curious, if you were to respond to what got overlooked, how would you respond to that question?
I would probably respond by saying that I think that I can reflect back now and realize that a lot of things get overlooked when we try to operate as something that we're not. I gave a few examples. I mean, when I stood up for policy, it was wrong. It was wrong. I should have been, you know, weak in the way of, not worrying as much about policy as I was about what was good for this for this student and what the student really needed.
We
Thing in that,
always worry, particularly if you're an aspiring leader and listening to this, or you're new in the profession and you're considering you're presented with an opportunity to look at policy, and you have potentially some flexibility, and you think this is the way I'm going to go. You hear in the back of your head, you're setting a precedent. You are setting a
oh
precedent, and you
yeah,
are worried about how that might expose you in the future. And so it is easy to side with policy. And I
yeah.
hear your reflection on where you might have seen the opportunity to look past policy and see the child and what they need.
Absolutely. Or the teacher or the colleague, in a moment where, one of my biggest issues with HR departments in schools over the years have been, somebody can call HR department, they can be the most caring, lovable people to hear a story about somebody's, a spouse who has terminal illness, and they don't have any sick days, and they know they've got FMLA, but the money, and what can you do? And the answer is, oh my goodness, we're so sorry that you're going through that, but policy doesn't let us help you. I mean, of course they don't say it that way, but that should never happen. That should never happen. And I think that that's an extreme example of what young leaders and I myself did many, many, many times in my young years, learning how to lead. I leaned into the parameters more than leaning into the human being, and again, I'm happy to say that evolved for me over the years, but I'll tell you, it was never more crystal clear in my eyes than when I got off that boat, talked to that TV station, and then walked on. I went down to the downtown Eureka area to help sandbag that night, and I felt like a new leader and a new human being, and the things I noticed that opened up and smoothed out for me after that. And that's when I started in talks. I'd started talking about more personal things and more opening up. I had never talked about losing my brother. I would have never done that. I would have never done that on a podcast.
It's interesting. Transformational leaders typically can look back and there was a transformative moment, and
Hmm.
that was your moment. I'm
Yeah.
curious, I'm curious about relationships and how that experience or your experiences over time, what have you learned about relationships, particularly when you think about the superintendency?
All the times that you can look back and say, gosh, that employee walked by my office and I was busy and they kind of waved and I thought, wonder if they wanted to talk, but you didn't talk. Take 5 minutes, and you're going to gain 100 miles in flattening things. Again, be human. Don't, try to put everybody in a way. Don't put yourself on a pyramid at the top. Put yourself on a pyramid at the bottom where people are, you know, uh, you're taking their weight on, but you're also letting them know that weight's heavy for you. I think that goes a long way with leveling things. We're leaders for, superintendents, especially, gosh, in a small district, you're a community leader, and a large district, you're a community leader. And quite often, the local politics and the goings on really had the school district right at the center of things. So you have to be that de facto leader. But we can be seen as real human beings. And I do want really quick to say that I think there are slightly different types of vulnerability. I talk about it in two different ways. I talk about it the way we've been talking about it today, that it's okay to realize that, every leader can be vulnerable. But there's also vulnerability that opens up weaknesses. And that's usually the result of situations that are chaotic. If you don't have unity, the opposite of that is usually confusion. And when you have confusion in a system, then you're opened up to all kinds of vulnerabilities. So I just want to clarify that, especially for the few people that may have heard me speak about this stuff before, that type of vulnerability you want to avoid. That is the result of chaos. But human vulnerability, I think, goes a long way to leading students, to leading teachers, to leading, people that are so important in the system, bus drivers, custodians, taking the time to be one of them and acknowledge what they do, and even a willingness to do what they do, just goes a long way for your ability to lead.
So, when I think about the examples you've given, whether it be the flood policies, practices, whether it be the Federal Leave Act, FMLA, there are, I imagine there's a common thread about what is frustrating. And I wonder if it is that while superintendents are seen at the top of the organization and as an individual who is believed to be able to make sweeping change quickly, sort of a I decree, that
Mm-hmm.
there's a level of frustration that I have felt where I could not move an entire large organization. In those situations, what was frustrating for you?
I think what's always been frustrating for me as a leader, specifically in education, so I have to specify that because I assume it would be the case in other situations. And I'm learning a little more because I'm a school system now inside of a corporation. But for schools, I think always we want to be cultures of people, but the powers to be sometimes cause us to be cultures of compliance. And spent a majority of my leadership career trying to take the bureaucracy out of education because of the examples that we talked about. Hey, I want to help you, but I can't help you because of X. You want to help somebody, you can help somebody. It may be small, but you can. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. I think it's the leaning toward a culture of compliance by default, checking the box, staying inside the parameters and the protocols, instead of being a culture of people and taking care of people.
And in the end, what was something that was good that came out of all of these experiences?
I think that, when you can look back and reflect on, I talked about that epiphany that I had getting off that boat after that flood. in things opening up to me, how you can start seeing the real impact of your leadership. You can start feeling the impact of your leadership. You suddenly allow people to see you in a different way, and they approach you in a different way. You walk in a school building and there's genuine joy, or at least a lot of really good actors appearing to be happy that you're there, making you feel part of them. How many superintendents would admit this? One of the hardest things about being a superintendent is that you can't walk out of your office and go commiserate with the superintendent across the hall. You're the only one that's precisely in that specific position. And it can be lonely. And how many superintendents would admit that at some point in their career, they were in a classroom, in a building, at an event where they were there because of who they are, but they didn't necessarily, in their heart of hearts, feel like they belonged or they were part of it. Because you're that man behind the curtains, that woman behind the curtains. And the epiphany that I had, what changed for me was I could start feeling that sense of belonging a whole lot easier, because when I would walk in buildings, I felt more like a brother, more like a colleague, and absolutely like a friend, way before it was like, hey, the superintendent's here. You know, I thought students gave me a nickname a long time ago as a high school principal of DK, because they didn't want to call me Dr. Knost, and I didn't want them to either, quite honestly. And a student, Kyle Jacobs, who I'm still quasi friends on social media with today, he came up with DK, and I love that. And after that epiphany, to walk into a school building and have a teacher colleague refer to you in a name that just makes you feel like part of something, it's powerful, and it does change things, and it changes your ability to lead, and it changed my ability to lead even more effectively than I had.
I love it. And I thought that one of the things you were going to say was the number of programs and things like that. And I'm even more impressed with this conversation and with you, because it wasn't about the things that one could look back on in terms of what they created, but rather the human piece, the sense of belonging, at the very core of who we are as humans is wanting to feel like we belong. And so when you think about what was something that was good that came out of this, that I was able to feel like I belonged to something bigger than myself, and that's pretty remarkable. We will end there. My guest again today was Dr. Eric Knost, Superintendent of the MERS Missouri Goodwill Excel Centers. And Eric, thank you for being a caring leader. Thank you for being a vulnerable leader. Thank you for being a human-centered leader. Thank you for someone who embraces the culture of curiosity and compassion. And so I will say, DK, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action.